I had the great experience of meeting Elvis when I was like 17 years old in San Antonio, Texas, April 15th, 1956. And this happened to me because I had the honor to be the first fan club president of any size that had ever been formed for Elvis. And that was quite by accident. Happened when a top radio station announced my address over the radio and said that there was an Elvis Presley fan club, and it was a joke. And I went out and got all this mail out of my mailbox. Everybody wanted to join the Elvis Presley fan club. Well, there was no Elvis Presley fan club, but there were hundreds of letters. This was early on when Elvis was playing Texas. I was in Dallas, Texas, and he played all around Texas in all these little towns because he wasn't real popular in Memphis and Tennessee because he was too rock and roll and they wanted hillbilly. So he says a lot of times that if it wasn't for Texas, he wouldn't even had a career. And I guess it's meaningful that his main fan club came out of Texas. And I was just the right person at the right time. My aunt was the secretary at KLIF to the president, and I was there, and this disc jockey came in making fun of Elvis Presley, this stupid guy, this crazy record. And I had already heard him on the Big D Jamboree on the radio. But I said, oh, he's going to be a great hit. And the guy was laughing, and I said, well, he is. And I said, I even have a fan club for him. Well, I had two sisters, so that was sort of true. And it was like, he said, oh, you do? And I said, yeah, I do. And so apparently he got my address from my Aunt Billy and announced it on his show, at KLIF, which is a top radio station. And then I got all this mail wanting to join the fan club. So I contacted, I had found a Sun Records promotional poster in the Melody Record Shop in downtown Dallas. It had I still got it, by the way. And you gotta love him if you still got a poster from that far away. But at any rate, I saw an address on there, and it was Bob Neal was his manager at that time. So I wrote Bob Neal, and I said, I need a fan club. I've got all these people, and they need cards, and they need pictures. And so I get this letter back from a secretary. It says, Bob Neal is no longer managing. He's been turned over to Tom Parker. You know, it was from Colonel Tom Parker's big office thing. And said, we don't have any facilities for Elvis for a fan club. He's just one of the new smaller attractions that Colonel Parker has. He just got him. It called him an attraction. And you know, he has Hank Snow and the Carter sisters. And it was like Elvis was just this little side guy. So she said, the Colonel told you to do just anything you want regarding a fan club for Elvis. And I said, and I thought, well, that's very nice. And so I wrote her back and I said, okay. I said, what do I do? I mean, I asked my mom, what do you do? She said, well, you know, she said, the big thing about a fan club is that sometimes the fan club presidents get to meet the guy. And she says, I remember back when Frank Sinatra said that, you know, the fan club presidents always got to meet the guy. And I said, oh, you're kidding. I said, well, I have a fan club right now. So, you know, I went out and I designed the Presley Pink fan club card, which now is in Graceland. And the first one is, you know, and had it printed. And answered all the letters. There was like several hundred of them. And I wrote back to Colonel Parker's office and said I've started the club and blah, 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 and printed the cards. So after a while, about a month later, I got another letter from Parker's office and said, Elvis is going to be in San Antonio on April the 15th. Would you like to go down there and meet him? I said, that's it. This is the dream has come true, the fulfillment of the dream. So San Antonio was like over 200 miles from Dallas, but they didn't know that in Memphis. So they thought it was right down the road. And I said, oh, I'd love to do it. Set me up. What do I need to do? So they sent me a telegram from Colonel Parker that said, this is Kay Wheeler, and allow her backstage at the Municipal Auditorium in San Antonio. So I got on the grant. I happened to have a friend that lived down in San Antonio. Because I had lived there as a child, and I had like an old childhood girlfriend there that I could stay with her parents and her. My mother allowed me, so I got on a Greyhound bus, my white spike heels and my beige sheath dress, and I rolled down there to see Elvis all by myself. And that's why I like the song "Trying to Get to You." It's one of my favorites because that's the way I was feeling as I was rolling down the highway on that Greyhound bus. I thought, I'm really doing this, right? I had my telegram from Colonel Parker. It was like the magic key, you know. And so I go to the place where the auditorium is, and there's zillions of kids there, and I walk up to some policeman or somebody by the gate, and I said, I need to get in, here's my telegram. It was like, it was a magic key. It got me through every single door. And so I got into the auditorium, and then there was Tom Diskin, who was Elvis's road manager and Colonel Parker's right-hand man. And by the way, a very gentleman, a very nice person. And I said, I'm Kay Wheeler, and I have the fan club in Dallas, and they knew who I was. And he said, oh, okay. He said, well, Elvis is in there, go right on in. It was like a, you know, a dressing room. I said, just go right on in. Go right in. I said, boy, I don't know if I can do this or not. I think I was more like 16. Oh, no, I wasn't. I was 16, I think. And my heart was beating 1,000 miles an hour. So I go in and I open the door, and he's sitting there in front of a mirror adjusting his ducktail, okay? He's doing his hair. And when I walk in, we're the only ones in the room. He spins around, and he turns around and looks at me, and he says, I said, I'm Kay Wheeler. I'm the president of your fan club. And I mean, I was like protecting myself, okay, because I didn't know what he was going to do. So he walks up to me, and he looks at me up and down, and he takes his hand, he runs his hand down, up and down the sides of me. He says, baby, is that all you? And I'm about to pass out at that time, and I say, yes. And, you know, and then, you know, he just kind of, you know, starts kissing around on me and everything, and I'm starting to freak out because I'm this very gentle, frightened to death teenager. And so we had a really good time in there, and he says, well, what do you want me to do? And I had some pictures. I said, sign them. You know, I wanted him to autograph some things for me, and so he signed some pictures for me. And, you know, we just started, you know, kind of hugging around and kissing around on me, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna pass out. You know, that song, all I could do was stand there paralyzed. I mean, I was just paralyzed, and I just couldn't get into it because I was too frightened. So then the press came in and knocked on the door and, you know, kind of interrupted the whole thing. But that was my first meeting with Elvis, never to be forgotten. In fact, here's one of the pictures of him. Here's one of the pictures of him at that time. That was taken that very day, so you can just see that we were just having a ball. And, you know, he was definitely getting away with holy murder there, you know. But this is a never to be forgotten moment, and we had some great times. I danced while he was during the break, while he was up on stage, and when he came off, he said, show me some of those steps, let's dance. And so we did a little dancing there while Scotty Moore played the guitar. So we did a little rocking and bopping there, and a little bumping and grinding. So that was my first meeting with Elvis Presley. So about a little bit later, then the press came in and kind of interrupted everything. And so meanwhile, while he was talking with the reporters, he kept his arms around me and, you know, was pointing and giving them directions and saying, shoot it over here and move over there. And we were just together during that whole scene. And when they asked him, he said, are you going to get married, Elvis? And he squeezed me real tight. He said, why buy a cow when you can milk it through a fence? Well, that sounded horrible to me. And I just got froze up, you know, right there on the spot. And so later when he went on the show, I was dancing in the wings while he was out there on stage, and he came off and he said, let me see what you were doing there, because I was doing some of my crazy wild and rock and roll, rock and bop. And so he said, show me how to do that. And so we did. We danced some, and Scotty Moore played the guitar for us, and we did a little dance scene there. And that was in San Antonio in 1956. And what a great way to meet Elvis. Does it get any better? In his early days, he did a lot of leg shaking, you know, just mostly leg shaking and leaning back. Part of the rock and bop that I have is the heel-toe thing, and a little bit more swinging out the legs. And we did that, and that's what I showed him. But I saw later on it was incorporated, whether he saw it on somebody else or whether that made the impact, who would know? I have no way of knowing that. But I did get a chance to dance with him and at least show him a couple of those rock and bop steps. And he got a little bit more elaborate in his dancing, and I don't know where he got that from, Jackie Wilson or some great black singer or somebody. I wouldn't take the credit for that, but I did expose him to what I do on my dance steps. One of the great things about having a mother like my mom was that she was an artist, and she was very open, and when I wanted to have the fan club for Elvis, she thought it was a fun thing. where a lot of parents were totally freaking out about having Elvis Presley in their lives. They thought this was the end of their children. You don't realize that rock and roll was like marijuana or drugs or something horrible. I mean, the parents in the 50s were terrified that their kids were dancing to rock and roll. Terrified. They considered it the black music. This was a nightmare. And Elvis was the biggest nightmare of all because he was white and he was bringing it to everybody. But what made me very lucky was that my mom was so open, and she said, oh, this is a great idea. And so I probably couldn't have ever done any of this if I hadn't had a mother that was at least somewhat understanding. And she really loved Elvis, and she got to meet Elvis at the Cotton Bowl and backstage at the press conference. And she also was an art teacher, and she decided that she wanted to paint an oil portrait of Elvis, and she did that in 1956. He was not real big, not huge, big mega star, and nobody knew whether he was going to last for 6 months. People would say, this Elvis Presley, he's going to last a good 6 months. So my mom did a portrait of him, and we presented it to him at the press conference at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas, October 11th, 1956. And she was there, and everybody was leaving, and she said, I didn't get to meet Elvis. And Parker said, come on, Elvis, time to go. And I said to Elvis, Elvis, my mom wants to, she didn't get to meet you, you know, and we presented the portrait. And he said, well, never mind, wait a minute, hold everything. I want to meet Kay's mama. And he came over there and talked to her and gave her an autograph. And that was just the thrill of her lifetime. And she was just a cool mom. And I never had to rebel or do anything because she was kind of like, say, if you just keep yourself good and okay and take care of yourself, I'm going to let you have some fun. So I didn't have to go underground. And I always told her everything, and she always knew what was going on. And that was my mom. Her name is Vivian, and she was just wonderful. And she still inspires me, even though she's not here anymore. At the same time, he was making Jailhouse Rock and I was making Hot Rod Gang. Just how crazy can life be? And none of it was planned. None of it was planned. It was just happened out there. And then Rock Baby Rocket is now in the history books when they start talking about the beginning of rock and roll and films and all that. That movie, Rock Baby Rocket, that little movie I made, is considered the prototype movie of the 1950s for teenagers. So I thought that was kind of wild, and then my pictures in the history book there, it's kind of exciting. I never thought I was going to make history. I don't know if that's a good way to make history or not. To be the prime juvenile delinquent at the time. Actually, when I was there with Elvis in San Antonio, I said, well, when you come to Dallas? He said, well, I can't, but Colonel says Dallas is too big. We can't get a booking there, but we're going to play Fort Worth. I said, Fort Worth? I said, you know, you've got to come to Dallas. And he said, oh no, well, Parker says we can't do it, we can't do it. I said, well, we'll see about that. And that was, so I came back to Dallas and asked my Aunt Billy, who worked at KLIF, radio station KLIF in Dallas. I said, how come we can't get Elvis in Dallas? She said, well, maybe if you had a ride-in campaign with all your fan club members, maybe we could get him here. Maybe if enough kids ride in and, you know, KLIF to the radio station. I said, well, we're going to do it. So we had a huge ride-in campaign, and Gordon McClendon at radio station KLIF in Dallas, Texas, booked Elvis for, and they sold so many tickets, they had to book the Cotton Bowl because there was no place to put as many tickets as they had sold. So we were playing the Cotton Bowl. So this is when the press conference that my mother, you know, we gave him the portrait and we had some great times with him. And so they had this huge cyclone fence in front of all the people sitting in the Cotton Bowl so that they couldn't go out on the field. And Elvis, they had a stage right out in the middle of the football field with Elvis, you know, Scotty and BJ Fontana and his whole band. And I was the only teenager. Elvis said, bring her out on the field. I was the only teenager allowed on the field. There were some photographers out there. And there's a picture of that to this day, the State Fair of Texas. That was a big thrill because he jumped off the thing and was saying, you know, that's all right, little mama. And I was right there freaking out on the grass. He jumped down on the grass off the stage and on the ground. So that was a great thrill. I mean, I was like a 17, 16-year-old kid just having the time of her life, you know, and never to be forgotten. I think of all the girls, and there were always zillions of them throwing their bodies at him, I think the thing that may have attracted him to me was that I was not one of them. I really didn't want to get into that mess. And he even said to me, honey, you're too smart for your own good. And I think that made him more interested in me a little bit, because I was a little more of a challenge. It's kind of like if everybody's just throwing ice cream at you, you might want to try some lasagna, you know what I mean? So he invited me down to the Louisiana Hayride, and I needed to start a fan club down there anyway, and there was a girl that wanted to do it, and so I gave my mother an excuse. So I take a night train down to Shreveport by myself, you know, wild and crazy girl. And so, you know, he sees me at the conference, at the press conference there, and so he tells Cliff Cleves to take me up to a hotel room and have me wait there for him. And so I just didn't, Cliff Cleves didn't tell me that. He said, just come with me, Elvis wants you to go somewhere. I said, oh, okay. So I walk up there, and he opens the door, and there's this room, and there's, you know, the big bed and all that. And he said, just wait here. And I said, okay. So I'm sitting there, and the more I'm sitting there and waiting, the more I feel like this is something I'm not going to be able to do. The more I started to figure it out. So I waited there about 10 or 15 minutes, and everything my mother had ever taught me started rolling through my mind. I'm thinking, you know, Mom would not like this, and I'm letting her down. She trusts me to go off to Shreveport, Louisiana to meet Elvis Presley, to be with Elvis. How dangerous is that? And here I am sitting here, and I know better than this. So after talking with myself, you know, at least 15 minutes, I jumped out of the chair and ran out in the hallway. And I saw some of Elvis's guys standing out in front of another room, and I ran in there, and there Elvis was sitting there with them. They were laughing and cutting up, you know, with the Memphis Mafia. And so when he saw me, he said, Kay, come over here, you know, and the green coat that I love was sitting there on the bed. And he said, do you want a sandwich? And I said, no. And he said, well, we're ordering sandwiches, you know. And so I put on the green coat and, you know, kind of, you know, walked around the room a little bit. And then I decided, you know, again, I'm getting out of here. I'm leaving. You know, I'm not hanging around. So I just made a silent exit. And the first thing you know, I was going down the hallway. I went down to a stairwell, and Elvis was running after me. So he kind of cornered me in a stairwell. And so I wanted to have a serious conversation about life or something. You know, the last thing on my mind was probably what was on his mind. He wanted a little less conversation, a lot more action. And I said, you know, Elvis, I said, what do you think life is all about? Just hoping to get him off of some other talk, get him off of the thing that's always on his mind. And so he just grabs me, throws me against the wall, starts grinding his pelvis on me and kissing me. And I'm thinking, this is just so crazy. I can't get into this right now. I was just so taken aback by it that I was just, you know, and a lot of women would say, you should have just gone crazy at that point. But I think that